Welcome to the Nursing Post podcast, All Nursing All the Time with Ashley Moore and Rosa Horsley. In this episode, we discuss post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. Our goal is always to inform and start conversation.
PTSD has been called many different names over the years. It's been known as shell shock and combat fatigue from soldiers returning from war. Although PTSD is really well known and associated with veterans, they are not the only ones who suffer from this illness. People who have experienced or witnessed traumatic events also suffer from PTSD.
According to the APA and the website singlecare.com/blog/news/PTSD-statistics, our statistics show that PTSD affects approximately 3.5% of U.S. adults every year. That accounts for 8 million people. 70% of adults experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. 7 or 8 out of every 100 people will experience PTSD at some point in their lives. Women are twice as likely as men to have PTSD. 3 ethnic groups are disproportionately affected and have higher rates of PTSD than whites. In the United States, that accounts for Latinos, African Americans, and American Indians. 20% of people who experience a traumatic event will develop PTSD. 49% are from sexual assault. 32% have severe physical assault. 16.8% are from serious accidents. 15.4% are from shooting and stabbing victims. 14.3% are from the unexpected death of a loved one. 10.4% are from parents of children with life-threatening illnesses. 7.3% are from people who have witnessed violence. And 3.8% are from people who have experienced a natural disaster. In one study of 1,938 veterans, a PTSD prevalence of about 14% was present in veterans who served in Iraq. In reports, a 10% prevalence of PTSD has been extrapolated for all Gulf War veterans, and about 30% of Vietnam vets have had PTSD in their lifetime, according to the American Psychological Association.
People suffering from PTSD will go through intense, disturbing thoughts and feelings related to an experience long after the traumatic event has ended, and they relive the events through flashbacks or nightmares. Some people feel sadness, fear, anger, or detached or estranged from people. Those with PTSD may avoid situations that may remind them of the traumatic event or have a strong negative reaction to loud noises or an accidental touch. It just triggers.
It's a trigger for them.
Exactly.
There are some risk factors that are associated with PTSD. I did mention some of them above. So surviving a dangerous event or trauma, being hurt, seeing another person hurt, witnessing somebody dying or a dead body, having childhood trauma, having a fear and feeling of horror, helplessness, having little or no social support after the traumatic event, dealing with extra stress after the event, such as a loss of a loved one, pain and injury, or a loss of a job or a home, having a history of mental illness or substance abuse can contribute to risk factors of having post-traumatic stress disorder.
Some signs and symptoms that may occur for patients who have PTSD are flashbacks, and that's where they relive the trauma over and over. And this even includes physical symptoms. Their heart races, they can get sweaty, diaphoretic, they have bad dreams or difficulty sleeping, frightening thoughts. They are easily startled. They feel tense, like they're on edge all the time. They can even have outbursts. Patients may stay away from places, events, or objects that remind them they triggered that PTSD, that flashback. Avoid thoughts or feelings that may be related to the event that caused PTSD, negative thoughts about themselves or about places or the world in general, distorted feelings like guilt or blame, and loss of interest in doing things that they love to do, and trouble remembering features of that event. They want to block it out so they can't recall certain specific events or details.
Diagnosis is usually made by a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and adults must have all of the following for at least 1 month to have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. At least one re-experiencing symptom, at least one avoidance symptom, at least 2 arousal and reactivity symptoms, and at least 2 cognition and mood symptoms. Treatment is typically a combined approach. It's psychotherapy, medication, and alternative treatments.
We're going to first go over psychotherapy, and then we'll get into the others. You have cognitive behavioral therapy, and this has come up in several podcasts that we have done. And so it's something that they are using in an array of different psychological disorders. But it helps with negative thinking and self-blame that contribute to PTSD in some patients.
Like when I think of this, for some reason, I want to say something like survivor's guilt.
Right. So you have to, it's not your fault, and make sure that you get that understanding. There was something else that I found that I knew nothing about, and it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. And this therapy is specifically to treat trauma. It uses measured exposure to traumatic memories with alternating stimuli. Eye movements being one of those, hence the eye movement desensitization. I'm going to actually read, this is directly from a page.
It's an excerpt.
Yes, thank you, about this therapy. I just found it to be interesting and I knew nothing about it. EMDR therapy is an 8-phase treatment. Eye movements or other bilateral stimulation are used during one part of the session. After the clinician has determined which memory to target first, he asks the client to hold different aspects of that event or thought in their mind and to use his eyes to track the therapist's hands as it moves back and forth across the client's field of vision. As this happens, for reasons believed by a Harvard researcher to be connected with the biological mechanism involved in rapid eye movement or REM sleep, internal associations arise and the clients begin to process the memory and the disturbing feelings. In successful EMDR therapy, the meaning of the painful event is transformed on an emotional level. For instance, a rape victim shifts from feeling horror and self-disgust to hold a firm belief that I survived it and I am strong. Unlike talk therapy, the insights clients gain in EMDR therapy result not so much from clinician interpretation, but from the client's own accelerated intellectual and emotional processes. The net effect is that clients conclude EMDR therapy feeling empowered by the very experience that once debased them. Their wounds have not just closed, but they have transformed. As a natural outcome of the EMDR therapeutic process, the client's thoughts, feelings, and behavior are all robust indicators of emotional health and resolution, all without speaking in detail or doing homework used in other therapies.
Well, that's very interesting.
It really is. I had no idea that this even existed.
That's one of the things I love about, every time we do a podcast, we do the research. Like, we're sitting there, we're taking the time, we're reading articles, we're reading scientific journals, we're reading all of this stuff. And every single podcast that we do, I swear I learned something new every single time.
Well, this actually focuses on healing from that traumatic event and not just discussing it and coping with it. And not that there's anything wrong with
or
that.
reliving it over and over and
But
over and
it
over
actually
again.
changes your mind, the way your mind processes the traumatic event. And it just was amazing.
I know there are others like exposure therapy. I think we're a little bit more familiar with that one. It enables a practitioner to help people safely confront their trauma so they can learn to cope. And one of the techniques used in exposure therapy involves virtual reality programs that allow a person to experience a situation in which they experience trauma to help process it. So when I think of this, I think of maybe somebody who has like a fear of, I don't know, spiders or a fear of heights. And so with exposure therapy, you're giving them little bits of that exposure at a time until they can build a tolerance to that experience or fear in order to work their emotional way through it.
Right.
Group therapy, which I think we're all also familiar with, is talking with others who have experiences, because it can help build strength when someone is feeling alone. And with group therapy, it helps with feelings of shame and it gives supports. And there are groups of survivors of sexual assault and combat trauma. And some of those members are the ones living with post-traumatic stress disorder.
So you can actually connect with other people
who are experiencing the same thing that you experience.
There's some medications. There's not a lot of medicines. They are the SSRIs, which is a type of antidepressant. It's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and they've been approved by the FDA for treatment of PTSD. Medical marijuana is indicated for PTSD, but to date, there's not been any randomized controlled trial to show the effectiveness of marijuana for PTSD. So it's really hard to know how that really will affect patients. And there's actually a lot of research going on right now on the use of MDMA for PTSD. It's an amphetamine. From what I've read, there's actually been a lot of positive feedback, but for those of you that are listening in the United States, it's not legal here.
It's not legal here. I think they are using it in some trials. It's very small because they do consider MDMA to be like a narc or a narcotic. You know, they kind of classify it up there with the other things, you know, like cocaine and, you know, LSD and all that other stuff. But from what I hear and from what I've read, it may be very promising.
Yes, it seems to be having good results from what's come of it so far. There are some alternative and complementary therapy. I'm going to save one for last because I know that Rosa is going to have something to say about it. But you have yoga, aqua therapy, acupuncture, mindfulness and meditation, strategies and practices, and of course, service dogs.
So, yeah, I recently, for Christmas, everybody knows that my son has ASD. It's not PTSD, but there is research and scientific proof to be found in service animals or ESA animals. And I am so for it. I've noticed the difference in my child. I know that these animals make a world of difference in lives, a lot of lives, not only service animals, but emotional support animals. There's scientific proof, and I'm hoping that sometime here in the near future, we do a podcast just on that topic alone.
And we can, because it's our podcast.
Because we can do whatever we want to do.
There we go.
As nurses and healthcare professionals, it's our responsibility to be educated and informed. And with that being said, we're going to link an assessment screening tool for PTSD. I would suggest as healthcare professionals that you just take a second and go through it yourself. I think you might find it very interesting. And although, you know, June 2nd is technically Post-Traumatic Stress Awareness Day, June is also Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Month. We need to keep in mind that for somebody that has post-traumatic stress disorder, it's an every single day.
Absolutely.
So we just need to make sure that we are giving the education that we can. So we're going to attach to our show notes a booklet that you can download just by pressing on a link that will give you information on post-traumatic stress disorder. Make sure you know where to send people or give them information for support. So we'll also include that link in our show notes, along with offering some coping skills and mechanisms, which we will also post on our show notes.
And in the United States, we have the option to dial 211. It is a 3-digit number, like 911, but it gives you all the resources available in your community. And you can Google 211 in your area and it'll give you a whole laundry list of things that are out there and what's covered. Some of these options are free. That would be another great resource that you could use no matter where you are to find help.
As always, you can find our references and show notes on our website, thenursingpostpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, leaving your thoughts and comments and suggestions. And as always, thanks again for listening to The Nursing Post.